My name is Fleur Cosquer. I'm the head of talent development at SDI. I'm a white woman in her early 40s. I've got short, dark and white hair. I'm wearing glasses and a dark grey shirt, button all the way up. And I'm sat in my living room with a very nice print art behind me. So I just wanted to thank you all very much for joining us this morning for this session on accessibility. Accessibility is a big word. There are so many things we could be discussing today, and I have to say preparing the session was a bit of a was quite difficult, deciding on what to focus on. And the general consensus was, okay, this will be an introduction session and we need to have another one very soon to discuss more topics. So we have a really great panel with us today. I'm briefly going to introduce them to you. So we have, I'm just going to do it in the order of my screen. We have Kiana. Kiana is a filmmaker and an activist and an artist, and she'll be talking to us a bit more about her practice and about including accessibility or thinking about accessibility quite early on in her filmmaking process. We have Elena. Elena works for Screen Language, an Edinburgh-based company who handles all things, whole translating things related, but she was also one of the pioneers in Scotland in accessibility and providing accessible deliverables for production companies in Scotland. Alison, who works at Screen Scotland, but is also a consultant and an activist, who will be introducing us to the world of accessibility and inclusivity and helping us navigate it. And Helen, who is a festival programmer and who will be talking to us about accessibility from more an exhibitor's point of view. So as you can see, we have quite a lot to discuss today. So maybe without further ado, I'm just going to hand it over to Alison. So Alison, could you introduce yourself and maybe talk a bit briefly about your role at Creative Scotland?
The word of being told you're on mute. Hi, good morning. I'm Alison Smith. I'm just a year and probably a couple of weeks into a new role at Creative Scotland and Screen Scotland as Equality, Diversity, Inclusion Officer. I'm a white woman from a minority ethnic background. I'm wearing, I've got bad lockdown whitey hair that's mousy brown with the ends a lot lighter, badly cut fringe. I'm wearing tinted red glasses, and I've got a sort of a top on that's sort of white with red arms, and it's got a stag on the front. And I've got sort of plants behind me just to make sure I get enough oxygen in the space, and white wall, and I'm just by my windows, so it's slightly noisy. Okay, Creative Scotland, where do I start? So it's new role. I'm now into second year of what is an extended contract. So I work with Creative Scotland and Screen Scotland, so I'm the sort of support equality diversity person there. And to put it in context, my background is been working in disability arts in various guises, working project side, performing in digital activism as pesky people, and that's going back to 92. And believe it or not, we're still having the same conversations that I had then, still have them now. So, you know, if you put it in that context, things have moved and shifted, but not in a big, massive way. Still a lot to do. So Creative Scotland, we support, part of my remit is to support artists coming forward and needing that to make applications, and that includes to Screen, which I've done a couple of times. Then we've got various programmes specifically aimed at disabled artists, including Create Inclusion, which has just gone in its second year, and there's going to be another round at some point. Unlimited commissions, which have just been announced. So there's a couple from Scotland, and there's also 2 BBC commissions that, like, all of the arts councils have got 2 each, so they're just about to be announced. So there's some very specific work gets done there. With Screen, my main remit has been helping to steer and put together Scottish criteria for the BFI diversity standards. So it's been quite an interesting journey of looking at what is needed, what we really mean by diversity, how can we make it Scotland specific, what about percentages, you know, so you can imagine sort of discussions and quite fraught discussions on that one, you know, do we need, what do we need? And they will be launched, hopefully by the summer. They should have been launched last summer. So there's going to be various bits happening on that to come up, and that's really going to impact also on filmmakers, because there's a big drive in diversity, not just about what's representation on screen, but then also in terms of behind the camera talent, what it means in training, what it means in so it's not just about you keep getting mentored, you actually find a way of progressing. And I mean, the BBC's got an event on Thursday where they're talking to producers and talent managers about very much about those issues. So there seems to be a lot happened in the last year, but what's really nice that was being part of SQUIFF Festival. I don't know how many years now it's been, Helen, but and being involved in that in terms of the access and engagement, and just really seeing the impact that you can have when you start making it accessible from an audience point of view, and then also about what the representation is on screen. So it's quite a big area. Yeah. Do you want me to put some of the context to the Equalities Act in that before everybody falls asleep?
Yeah, I was trying to unmute myself. Typical. Yeah, maybe you can talk to us a bit more about the Equalities and BSL Act and why they are very important, what they are, and why they're very important.
Okay, I've got stuff that you can send around after if anybody wants to do a major dive. If I put it in context, or I'm going to get my document up, it's got the stats. If you put it in a context, this is going back to 2011 census, we've got 20% of Scotland's population has a long-term health problem or disability. And if you look at the screen workforce, it's only 10% of the workforce that identify as disabled. And there's a pay gap of £8,450 in terms of input. And this is right across the board. If you're disabled or a woman or from BAME background, and then you have the intersectionality of it, you're statistically more likely to be unemployed, to have issues in terms of education and employment. There's domestic abuse is higher, you know, so you've got all these multi-factor stuff that comes into play. And if you're looking in terms of BSL, there's more than 12,500 people in Scotland use BSL as their first language. But if you look at Ofcom's criteria for like accessibility, in particular in broadcasting, then you've got 100% captioning. There used to be this standard joke that if you lived in the Midlands, you went to bed if you were deaf, you went to bed at 10 o'clock at night, because that's when the caption stopped. And that just sort of shows how far we've come, that, you know, it's gone from being hardly anything to now you've got nearly 100%, but we still only have 5% audio description and 5% BSL. So that's why we've got initiatives like the BSL Zone, which is the Deaf Broadcasting Trust. In terms of the acts, we've got the BSL Act 2015. So if you look that up, you'll see that there was lots of targets that should have been reached last year in terms of the BSL Act, in terms of culture. And I can't see the evidence of it. And in terms of what that means is that in Scotland, BSR is protected as a language. It's not in England. It's recognised as a language. But then that was only because deaf people took to the streets, the same way disabled and deaf people took to the streets in the early 90s and tied themselves to buses in Westminster, which then led to the Disability Discrimination Act, which incidentally got taught the first bill that came through from that was everybody wanted, got talked out by the Minister for Disabled People, Nicola Scott. So when you look at the context of how far we've come in terms of legislation, it's been a massive fight. So the Equalities Act, in a nutshell, brings together the Equals Pay Act, 1970, the Sex Discrimination Act, 1975, the Race Relations Act, 1976, and the Disability Discrimination Act, 1995, which incidentally is 25 years old. Happened last November. So there's 9 protected characteristics in terms of age, gender reassignment, being married on a civil partnership, pregnancy, maternity leave, disability, race, including colour, nationality, ethnicity, ethnic or national origin, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation, and disabled people, we've got extra protection in terms of direct and indirect discrimination. And you're also protected if you're associated with someone who has a protected characteristic. And what's also additional, you can do what's called positive action. So you can put into play initiatives that encourage and get people, so in the film industry, it'd be about encouraging people into filmmaking, making more opportunities accessible in terms of training programs or like employment, but you can't do what's called positive discrimination. So it's sometimes feels like a bit of a fine line. So that's the Equalities Act for you. So it's got a lot to offer, but it's got a lot that's been, they keep trying to water down. So yeah, it's a bit of a difficult one on that, and just like trying to explain to people what it's about and what it means in context can sometimes be a bit hard to navigate around. But you know, at the end of the day, you want the diversity of filmmakers, we want the diversity of what we're watching on screen, we want to be represented on screen. First time I saw myself, I'm between two worlds, being deaf and in a hearing world, and the first time I saw a deaf woman learning on screen who'd been learning BSL, it's a film called My Song, and short film, and seeing how that person was represented and what it meant for her trying to fit into a deaf world, and then also what she was trying to do and communicate in the hearing world. Every time I watch it, it makes me cry. And it's one of those things that, you know, you want films that get people here and get action. And, you know, so the more that we're represented on screen, the more we're behind the camera, actually the more money the industry makes. So, you know, it's a win-win all round. Okay, that's me.
Thank you, Alison, and also for making the connection between accessibility and representation. That's very interesting. I was wondering if maybe very briefly you could talk about accessibility in terms of audience development, and what has been done in Scotland and how much there's still to be done. I know you briefly touched upon it earlier, but if you could maybe tell us a bit more.
Okay, I would say the biggest difference I've noticed since I've been back in Scotland, since I've lived in England a long time, and I think the biggest difference I would say is in terms of film festivals. So, and I will say that this year is the first time since 1999 that I was able to engage with BFI Player because it was captioned online. And what I can say about that is it's definitely Scotland that's been leading the way. SQIFF been leading the way, making all its films captioned and accessible, making the venue as fully accessible as possible. Helen will talk to you more on all these things that have been done, but that was when I really saw it in action for the first time, and all the independent film festivals will follow suit on the back of that, and that's because Film Hub Scotland put money into doing that, and I was nagging at them going, you need somebody to coordinate outreach across the whole country, you know, you've got this audience development that needs to be done. And you know, deaf people are going to theatre, but then that's because we've got really good connections with Solar Bear and Citizen Theatre in Glasgow. But you know, you need to do the audience engagement and development, and actually go meet, find the ambassadors in the communities, find that where people are meeting, where underrepresented groups are coming together. And you know, with SQIFF did really specific initiatives on that, and that's really important. And at the same time, it's about, you've got to apply to funding for that. And if you apply to Creative Scotland or Screen Scotland, and you've got a big chunk of an access budget, that gets looked at separately. Then rather than hitting the ceiling amount, you can go over the 15k, and it could be, the rest of it could be access. Most of it could be access, and you'll still get assessed as being under 15k. So things like that are really important. And with Scotland, I'd say the biggest shift has been the fact that we've got so well, this last year with everything going online, suddenly it's like, well, don't leave us behind. And you know, we need to think about, it's not just about in real life, it's about what's on screen. There's a lack of audio description on screen. Caption, Roberta said, but then we need to know what's happening. We need to know there's BSR live events. You know, it's about trying to get that word out. And, you know, so I'd say Scotland has definitely been leading the way. And I think now that we've got this whole different world, we've just got to keep challenging it, because otherwise, this is why you've got the no going back to normal manifesto. It's why you've got the so I'm going to try and remember it. There's the seven main demands about like not leaving disabled and deaf people behind in terms of creative industries. So, and I can put the links in the chat. So these things are really important, but at the end of the day, it's about what can you do yourself that will make that difference, so you become an advocate and an ally. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Alison. Well, I'm sure people might have questions for you at the end of this session, and we'll also share some of the links you've mentioned in an email to people after the session if they've missed them. So I think we're going to move to you, Kiana. So Kiana Kalantar-Hormozi, you are a filmmaker and an activist. And I was just wondering if you could maybe introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about your films and the themes you explore as a filmmaker.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm Kiana. I am in my 20s. I'm a woman. I have black hair down to my shoulders, and I'm wearing a black top that with a high neck, and I'm in my room, and I have really dark red walls. So yeah, I'm a filmmaker, artist, and troublemaker, or activist, as you said. I've worked on a lot of short form projects, most of which have been documentary or factual. My most notable films probably include my short doc, Polyamor, and my short protest hip hop film, Tax on Me, which is about the injustice of the care tax levied on disabled people who have to pay for their basic human rights. At the moment, I'm working towards my first feature documentary, Kiana, Stargazing and Spinraza, which is about my journey of fighting for life-changing medical treatments and sort of fighting within the context of an ableist system. So in my work, I mainly tend to explore the themes of double societal standards and getting people to think about outdated social conventions. Usually I try to offer an alternative viewpoint by showing a person's life and getting the audience to connect with human emotions, things that we all sort of understand that my tax on me film. How would you feel if you were taxed to go to the toilet? You know, all of us would find that shocking, I hope. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell, and my films. I like to challenge, connect, and be a little bit punchy.
Thank you. And could you maybe tell us a bit more about what accessibility means to you personally as a filmmaker thinking about their audience?
So this is a big one. I could go on about this for hours. To me, personally, accessibility starts behind the screen. So as a filmmaker, I'm thinking from pre-production, how do I make this process accessible for myself, first of all, because the industry, the way that we work, whether it's the schedules or the locations, or the ways of working, where documentary filmmakers tend to shoot their own material and hold a camera, all of that is not accessible to me. So I've had to reconstruct how I work and the processes. Whether that's hiring a DOP to work with, or thinking about, you know, at the end of the film as well, where is the film exhibited? Can my audience get to this location? Things like BSL have actually been really difficult for me as a independent filmmaker with no budget. It's always a kind of inner fight of, do I pay this extra couple of £100, or do I make the film slightly less accessible? Do I exclude? And that is really difficult as an independent filmmaker. I think it's different when you have a budget, if you're working with a broadcaster or a company. But there was once actually where I had booked a location to exhibit my short 1-minute film. And the lift in that location broke. And that was a free kind of offer that they gave me. And all that fell apart. And the only location I could find cost me £400. So I think when we're talking about accessibility, we have to talk about accessibility and money and socioeconomic status, and where is the filmmaker in their journey. As I feel I'm still very much at the start of my journey of trying to, you know, make more films, make better films, have kind of tell unique stories. So it's about supporting talent and helping them to move forward. So yeah, and I think in terms of the audience, it's about, you know, do you want everyone to watch your film? I hope the answer is yes. If so, it's about educating yourself, and I've had to do a lot of that. For me, accessibility tends to be physical, you know, physical access to a building or someone holding camera and working with me. But for a lot of people, it's not about that. So it's about, how do I make this accessible for a deaf person? How do I make this accessible for someone who has a visual impairment? So all of those things, and I'm still learning, and I still make mistakes. So it's about continuing that process.
And I suppose from your filmmaker's perspective, how do you reconcile the visual ambition for your film and more creative captioning, for instance? And very often filmmakers perceive them as antagonistic and not working. Why would I put big captions on my images? So what's your point of view on this?
Couple of things. First of all, I don't personally think it's antagonistic, but I think it is a different process. If you think about our brain usually processes picture and sound with traditional films and documentaries. So if your brain is processing sound, text, and image, it is different from our conventions, from what we're used to. But it's actually becoming quite normalized, I think, for online content, to have big text to kind of get the audience's attention, especially as nowadays on the internet, if you're making films for the internet, you only have a few seconds to get the audience's attention, and text is a really good way to do that. So for me, usually as soon as I have the concept down, and I start thinking about the visuals, I start thinking about how do I incorporate text into the visuals. I don't think it always has to be like over the top graphic design, but I think short form content really lends itself to that. And I think the other thing to have a think about is the personal experience of watching content versus the collective. Because right now we're watching a lot of stuff in our homes, on our computer or mobile screens. And there's a lot of personalization that can come into that. You know, do I want captions? Do I want captions in Spanish? Or, you know, but with the collective experience, I think we need to come to some sort of consensus of the new normal. As Alison said, like what is the new societal standard that includes everyone in our society?
Thank you so much, Kiana. I think I would have many more questions, but I think we need to move to Elena Zini. So Elena, could you maybe introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about your background, what drove you to accessibility and the work you've done so far?
Hi everyone, and thanks for having me. I'm Elena, and I am a brunette woman, maybe slightly Mediterranean looking, not sure. I'll have to say late 30s. I hope you can all hear me okay. Yes, I am the founder of Screen Language, which is an Edinburgh-based company which works on accessibility in various aspects. Not all of them, of course, because there's way too many, but mainly subtitles, audio description, and we are starting working with captions, BSL interpreting, and multilingual translation for making films accessible to people of different languages. I started working after finishing my master in translation and realized that there was a big need for subtitling. I worked into Italian and then came out, the local film community needed subtitles in other languages. So the company sort of grew and became Screen Language, which is what it is now. And we have been working a lot in Scotland, so we've been very lucky because the quality of production series is astounding. We were able to communicate a lot with the people we were working for, which has been fundamental. I'm trying to keep things small and under control so that we can always have a dialogue with the people we work with. And that is essential because, as you know, we're trying to make all the accessibility elements part of a film package so that they are recognized as a professional product and not just as an addendum, as something that you add because you have to at the very end of the filmmaking process. with regards to projects we've worked on, we worked with obviously SDI quite a bit, and that has been amazing because SDI is really focused on trying to make things accessible, especially lately, and working with Bridging the Gap, with finding out about all the amazing new talents that are in Scotland, but lots of local productions. Some of the latest films were maybe Killing Escobar, Eye of the Storm, I, Human, Eyes of Orson Welles, Do No Harm, Harry Birrell, Sound of the Future. These were maybe just in the last 6 months, all made fully accessible. We also do a lot of work with the universities because we like to find out more about what's going on with research. We had done a UNESCO-funded project which involved translating a film into 25 African languages and training subtitlers into languages that had never been subtitled into before, or subtitling films from indigenous Latin American languages into English for screenings at the Smithsonian in Washington. And we've just recently completed our first Gaelic audio description, which we think might be the first one ever for the Gaelic documentary Yorem. So it's very exciting because, as you all have mentioned, there's a lot to be done and a lot of new things happening. Just now we are making all of Iberodoc's documentaries subtitled, captioned. One of them specifically is an amazing documentary about a blind woman who is really multi-talented, who is a runner, a painter, a cello player, and this film we are audio describing as well. And it's going to be very important to share that with the blind and visually impaired community, I would say. We've also worked on Eye of the Storm, which was another film with a character that goes blind towards the end of the film. And he's a painter. So we have also worked on an accessible online exhibition, which can still be seen now. So these are kind of the more recent projects, I would say.
Thank you. And can you maybe share with us some of the practical and creative challenges that you regularly face when you work on accessible deliverables for documentary more specifically?
Sure. Yes, it was very interesting. It's great that we have documentaries as our main sort of documentary makers as our main client base, because they have quite specific, or we try to make things that suit that type of filmmaker. Obviously, all filmmakers want to render what their intentions are through the captions, through the audio description. But with documentaries, particularly relevant, because often the characters are alive and watching the film, and there's a big attention towards authenticity and identity, and making sure that people aren't misrepresented. And so we try to do this through everything we do, obviously. One big step is always checking everything we do with the clients. So filmmakers or producers, we always send things back before we deliver, because no one but them can tell us, is this what you were meaning to say? Is this character meant to sound like they are not a native English speaker, or they're stuttering, or they're scared, or all these things need to be double checked. And obviously we also, the fact that we are in Scotland means that we get a lot of Scottish films with Scottish accents. So trying to portray that in a way that is close to, both close to what they're saying and understandable. So when do you need to keep a Scottish flavor, but still maybe change some of the words that wouldn't otherwise be understood? So we had a lot of that, and it's been very exciting, but also a challenge. Other challenges we faced now has been the transition from DCP to VOD. So we used to make most of our products for cinema, and now we are making them mostly for online. And that meant that subtitles, for example, had to be provided in a different formats. So trying to understand what works, we produce them in a certain way. There are like gazillions of formats, and how do they actually look on the screen afterwards? There's often, very little we can do about subtitles looking a certain way, because in some players, everything is decided by the player, or everything is decided by the device you're watching on. So the subtitles may end up with a big black box behind them, and you've done everything you could to avoid that. But so it's been a learning process, this whole shift to VOD, and now it's good because we know this, and hopefully we can revert back to working for DCP, but also keep the VOD element. So that's been good. And another last challenge that I wanted to mention, which has been mentioned before, is the difficulty in seeing, so that sort of not educating, but making sure that people do get accessibility elements done when they can. So very often it sounds like, obviously I don't ask for funding myself, but it sounds like people either don't ask for the funding to get them done, and sometimes they get the funding, but end up not getting them done because it seems too complicated. Or when they get subtitles and not the description, then sometimes they're not then used either on cinema or on online. So all these are big challenges, and all these points need to be addressed. And it sounds like there is a big movement in Scotland towards this. So that's very good. It's very good to be part of it.
Yeah, it's very important that all these deliverables are not just tokenistic because your national funder has asked you to provide them, and you just do them and forget about them. It's also, I think, for the producers to get in touch with the various platforms, with the festivals, check the format, make sure that the audio description they've worked on is going to be used, the captions as well, and not being produced by a computer, as it is often the case with some VOD platforms. So quite a lot of work still to be done on that front for the producer, but it's great for them to have an ally in this in this adventure. Yeah, someone who knows about the formats.
Yeah, it's a steep learning curve for everyone, I think, but obviously we are in the deep of it, so it's good. We can dedicate a bit more time than most, I suppose, to looking into this.
And you mentioned that you were working with universities because of innovation, the innovation side of things. I was wondering if very briefly you could maybe tell us what's on the horizon from a technical perspective to make films even more accessible.
Yes, so we have two new things coming up. One is we're going to make a digital translation, that's how they called it, of an art exhibition that's in Glasgow called the Barrel Collection. And it's a very accessible new building. It's been refurbished for about a year and it's going to open in a few months. And we are making all the descriptions of all the art pieces translated into 8 different languages, including Gaelic. So trying to make them they're trying to make everything very accessible to everyone. But we are going to make them also BSL translated, which is a first for us. So that's very exciting because we really wanted to have the ability to do BSL translation. As we know, it's a very important language and needs to be there as well. And another project that we are working on, which is currently still at concept stage, is the idea of trying to put audio described films in an online platform, which would be a cinema. So a cinema intended just for blind and visually impaired people, and which would be easy to navigate, very easy to access, and there wouldn't be a an issue with switching on and off, because that's all there will be. Hopefully working as a cinema, so having a certain number of film on at each given time. This is still at concept stage, but was mainly dictated by the fact that we saw lots of the audio descriptions that we made didn't end up anywhere, which, even major festivals didn't screen them in cinemas and now are unable to screen them on online platforms. So we have been assigned some funding from Creative Informatics, and we are going to develop that now. So keep an eye on our pages to know more.
Thank you. And distributors and sales agents will hear from you soon then.
Yes, I'm going to be mailing everyone in Scotland soon. So you don't need to contact me, I'll contact you.
Make it UK wide.
Yeah, that's, just the pilot is in Scotland. But the good thing is we have been in touch with the RNIB, and they have a very active film group in Scotland of visually impaired people. So they are now giving us feedback through a questionnaire and about how keen they would be for this to happen. So it will definitely start from Scotland and then develop.
Thank you very much. We have a question, Elena. Could you mention the name of the last pilot you mentioned, please?
So it's, just now working title is the Sound Cinema project. Sound Cinema, but it's only on a document in my computer and just now, and I'm sharing it. I'm starting to share it with distributors and just now distributors.
Thank you very much.
Soon we will start putting it online. All going well.
Thank you, Elena. So I'm very aware of the time. So we're going to move to you, Helen. If you could maybe introduce yourself and also share with people the work that you've been doing with SQIFF Festival in Glasgow on accessibility.
Yep. So hi everyone, I'm Helen. I'm a white genderqueer person with short dark hair and glasses, wearing a pink t-shirt and a navy hoodie, and just in my flat I've got a film poster behind me and then otherwise a quite boring wall and window. So I co-founded SQIFF, Scottish Queer International Film Festival. That's been running we had the 6th edition of the festival last year, usually in Glasgow, but last year online, of course. It's obviously a queer film festival, very community oriented. And since the beginning of the festival, we've been concerned with deaf and disabled access, and we've kind of just built on that over time. So the first year of the festival, we did have every film with subtitles, at least, if not full captions. And we had BSL English interpretation the first year. And then since then, it's really been quite an intensive project to build on that through adding more measures or thinking about what measures we can have, which includes a lot of things, includes some audio description, includes having things like large print available, including things like content notes and various other things. And the goal has really been across that time to figure out how to integrate this access, rather than, as other people have been saying, to avoid having it as a kind of extra or addition.
Thank you. I think it's interesting, the thinking about it, not trying to have quick fix solutions, but really taking the time of thinking about your event and translating it into what it means in terms of accessibility. So for all organizations keen on developing their accessibility, it's something that you would really recommend to sit down and think about it properly. I was wondering, from an exhibitor's perspective, could you tell me what the main challenge is that you have or you're still facing when it comes to accessibility? So I think budget is one, but what would be the others?
Yeah, I mean, there are the kind of, I guess, what might refer to as everyday challenges, which does include budget to a large extent. But it also includes just how like problem solving. I mean, my examples come a lot about online screenings at the moment, and maybe to touch on that, having audio description, for example, we had our film program on Vimeo on demand last year, and as Elena had said, there seems to be few platforms or platforms aren't being built that allow audio description to be kind of turned on and off as you can do on Netflix, for example. So last year, our solution was simply to have two different versions of the film, where one was without the audio description track and one had it built in to the film. So yeah, there's just a lot of those kind of like, you know, how do we approach this? Yeah, I mean, as well as budget, there's the kind of volume of the work, the making sure every film is captioned has been a huge job. So we're basically employing freelancers to add captions to films which don't already have them. But it's also been important to us to then have a member of the team, our tech coordinator, who is also skilled in adding captions. So he ends up doing a lot of it. You know, films will come in last minute and they still potentially need that work done. So just kind of managing all, you know, the kind of timelines and budget and you know, the capacity of all the team members as well is difficult. But yeah, I guess I wanted to mention in terms of challenges, I think it's important to say that, you know, the main challenge is working within this context of a, you know, an ableist and oddist film culture. So it's, you know, I always, in some ways, we're kind of working backwards, where we are like, as a small exhibitor, responsible for making sure that, you know, trying to make the films and the events as accessible as possible when the filmmakers haven't always done that. Some people do, and that's great. And I know there are challenges, especially as Kiana said, for filmmakers working with no or really small budgets. But it doesn't really make sense for the film exhibitors to be the ones responsible for adding captions. Yeah, you know, as I said, we're trying to integrate deaf and disabled access into our processes, but I think filmmakers at the film production side, that needs to happen as well. And I really disagree that captions are in conflict with the art form. You know, there are many examples of, yeah, like you said, creative captioning. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there are now online workshops and actual workshops around creative captioning and how to include writing on screen to make sure that it's part of the narration, it's an add-on to the narration, and doesn't necessarily conflict with what we're watching. So yeah, and then so I was wondering if you had some top tips. always good to know. I suppose for organization wanting to assess how accessible they are. And I'm thinking, you know, all the way from calling for application for a workshop or a training program to running workshops and organizing events, beyond sitting down and thinking about it properly.
Yeah, I mean, I have, because I do give workshops and do consultations and things on access. So I have kind of developed some, like top tips, you can call them. So the first one is to always mention deaf and disabled access. For exhibitors, that would normally be in your event blurbs. But actually it can be across the board. It's also in like job adverts. You know, it's when you're inviting a guest speaker to come and speak, it's always asking, do you have any access requirements? And that could be adapted for filmmakers, you know, so because it could go into like crew call outs and things like that. And then what I say about that is, even if you don't have any specific access features, it's still possible to note, you know, different aspects like does the venue or location that you're using have wheelchair access and things like that. But even if you don't have specific access features, you can always just put a line saying, if you have access requirements to be able to attend or take part, then please get in touch and we'll do our best to meet them, type of thing. And you know, you can add a caveat that, like, you know, we don't have any budget, but we'll try, you know, these kind of things. That's just a tip I get, because I think one of the challenges is to get it into people's heads, to everyone's heads, just to remember, like, because I do see film exhibitors sort of you know, having captioned films, but then not mentioning it in any of their blurbs. You know, it's just, yeah, how to remember, always mention it, always be thinking about it. And that's one way to, you know, if you have that as a principle. And then other tips, don't try and do too much, focus on what you can implement. So obviously work out what budget and what resources you have. But also I think, you know, talk to people, find out if there's people who you're already kind of working with or in touch with who have particular requirements, and then work out, so what are the priorities here. And third tip was to familiarize yourself with the social model of disability, just again, so you're getting into that method of thinking. The problem here is the ableist culture, and we need to problem solve and work out how do we address that. And sorry, just to say that the social model of disability is often contrasted to the medical model of disability, the social model being that there's nothing wrong with the people who are deaf or disabled themselves. The problem is with the society and the design, and how do we tackle that issue with the design of everything.
Yeah, I think that the dialogue is really important, and I know that, for instance, SDI as an organization, although we are doing everything we can to be as accessible as possible, we still have a lot of work to do, and we're still discovering things. So it's very important, I think, and I want to encourage people to get in touch with us, for instance, when we're calling for applications, because if we've not thought about something, and you're struggling with access, we'll make sure that we find a way to welcome your application. So yeah, encouraging that dialogue, and we're learning. So we can learn from you. Ellen, you shared with me a link earlier, a Google Doc. So I'm just about to share it with everyone, but maybe you can tell us a bit more what's in there.
Yeah, so Film Hub Scotland had commissioned us to put together a guide to deaf and disabled access. So basically we attempted to sort of describe everything we do and our approach as well. And it kind of it takes you through step by step in terms of exhibitions. So it's thinking about, you know, from the very start, from the program research stage, from the programming film submissions, and going on through putting on events and marketing and things like that. Again, with the idea of integration behind it, so you're looking at every stage of everything you do, which again, something presumably filmmakers could be doing as well, so thinking about it from the very start.
Thank you, that's really useful. So I've just shared it in the chat. Okay, so thank you so much for keeping it quite brief. It feels like we covered quite a lot. I was wondering if we had any questions, or if anyone from the panel had a last comment they wanted to make, or something else they wanted to share. So yes, Alison.
I just want to highlight something that's quite, just reiterate again, is that the whole thing around mainstreaming, and the fact that whilst it's really great that we are moving forward and doing mainstreaming, and you know, where the opportunities are there in terms of engaging and bringing us in, you know, there's two key things that I've experienced in the entire time that I've been working in the sector. One, I constantly get asked to do things for free. So please remember that, you know, we may be experts in our own field, but you know, you wouldn't tell a plumber to come around and fix your taps for free. So please don't do that to the community, and that goes across the board in terms of BAME, disabled women, you know, it's right across the board. And the other thing is, and this has just been my particular experience in terms of attending events, is that when access is promoted and then it's not there, or it goes wrong, you need to have a strategy in place to know how you're going to deal with it. I've been to so many events, including like Glasgow Film Festival last year, where I couldn't access the events, and the way it was handled wasn't good at all. And the last thing I wanted to say is the whole thing around, and especially with digital platforms, is they have got to all be accessible. I appreciate, Elena, you're doing your initiative to look at what to do in terms of providing a platform in terms of audio description. If it means that you need to build a platform that then gets embedded into other platforms, then that's a great approach. Whereas if you're sending us all off to be a part of an individual platform, and that means we're not quite getting to have the same experience as everybody else, I've personally got real problems with that. And I think technology's got to catch up, but we've still got a long way to do in terms of like getting them to take it on board from the very start. You know, we've got the web accessibility, World Wide Web guidelines, you know, developers need training, you know, all those platforms can't just happen in terms of just coming in from a sort of project management user experience point of view. It's got to be that the platforms are built with this in mind from the very beginning. So, you know, they have this then all universal design approach. Well, then that's what we should be doing in terms of all the work. And we're going to have this hybrid of digital and in real life happening for quite a long time. So it'd be great if we can get it right now, because the whole one thing that wasn't touched upon was that whole digital poverty and digital exclusion issues, and that's another thing that we need to address, but that's another conversation.